So what the hell are the Minnesota Twins up to here? I spent some time on a live stream last night trying to put that together, just reacting to that most recent Yankees trade in real time. Very confusing, very hard to put together the logic, and I think I realized kind of sleeping on it and coming back to this morning, you can't do that. We have to actually step back. Let's step back. Let's go back to where we started this offseason. And let's remember that this is a last place Twins team that we're looking at here. A last place finish. But this is not a roster, for the most part, that's really fitting of a last-place roster. So if you look at any team in any given offseason, they really have three options. You either go for it, which if the Twins end up signing Trevor Story, it's going to be hard for me to not envision, wait, what if they would have kept Jose Barrios, paired him with Sonny Gray, have Trevor Story now? What if they would have kept Josh Donaldson and Mitch Garver? That kind of is what a Twins go for it would have looked like in some degree. But if we're being honest with ourselves, after a last place finish, again, would it have made sense for the Twins? Could we realistically expect them to have more of a go for it type offseason? Probably not. So what's the other most common logic, especially coming off a last place season? You rebuild. You just tear it down and you rebuild. A lot of things have to go so right. You have to be doing so many things right for that to work out and to cash out. And again, this roster, it was uneven. Certainly uneven, but it wasn't a last place roster. When you look at this team coming into this offseason, you didn't look at the Twins and say, this is a hopeless team. They need to rebuild. So I don't think that made sense either. And again, I'm just generally not a fan of that anyway. So option number 3 is to retool. And I think, we have a concept of that. We've said that a lot. We've heard the front office say that. But it's just not something we see in baseball a lot. Usually it's either go for it or rebuild. Teams are in both of those modes. Not a lot of people are going to be in the middle or in this kind of retool mode. I don't think we have a great concept of what that is because we don't see it very often in MLB in particular. So it's what is that? We're seeing what that is. We're seeing what that is. It's a little weird. It's a little strange. You might make one move that makes you think you're going one direction and another move that makes you think you're going another direction. And I do believe, if you think you have an avenue to be a good team potentially, but you don't realistically think you can build up yourself to be a division favorite or a World Series contender in one off season, it does make sense to build in a bunch of variance into your roster because then, that's young players, that's maybe inconsistent veterans, that's because if those guys click, you may elevate yourself to contending. Of course, if they don't click, you're probably going to finish in last again. But I think you are sort of giving yourself an interesting roll of the dice to where if you build in a lot of high variance players, a lot of upside, again, that can come from rookies like we're going to see with the Twins expected this year, or guys like Gary Sanchez, I think is a very high variance guy. I think you could say that about Rochelle as well. Again, I don't want to get too much into these moves because it could be by the time I hit a stop on this recording, those guys are traded. So I don't want to get too hung up on that. But, and I know I feel like I mentioned the Atlanta Braves in every other video right now, but I can't help but think of that team in this kind of logic. Everything was screaming at them to rebuild. Ronald Acuna tears his ACL. They're below 500 at the All-Star break. There was really no reason logically for them to try to keep going and trying to compete, and they did anyway, and they won the World Series. So I kind of, I've been very critical of this front office. To be honest, when I see the picture right now, I don't really get it. Even if they sign Trevor Story, I'm not 100% sure it'll all kind of crystallize for me. I will be very excited if they sign Trevor Story. Don't get me wrong. But I do want to give them some credit for trying to figure this out. Again, they're not going for it. That's kind of clear. Moving Donaldson's contract for the most part. We'll see. Again, it's a developing picture, so we'll see. Anything's on the table at this point. But I do like that they're not just totally going into rebuild mode. I appreciate that. And I think, again, the Atlanta Braves from last year are a good example of if you feel like you have a chance, maybe they didn't go for it. They didn't give up that much to acquire the players they did at the deadline. And speaking of high variance guys, the guys they got are about the highest variance players you can imagine. Jorge Soler, Eddie Rosario. We know how high variance Eddie Rosario can be. So this, to me, I think it kind of is an off-season version of how the Braves retooled at the deadline in some ways. Again, that's how I'm seeing it right now. The picture is very much developing. We will see. So my guess, though, is at the end of this off-season, we might not feel like the Twins roster is all that much better. I think we'll feel like they won't be the pick to finish last in the AL Central again, but we won't feel like it got all that much worse either on the MLB roster. Just different, a retooling, a new mix of guys, a new clubhouse, a new, just a refresh of everything. Again, I don't think we see it a lot, so we don't have a great concept of what that looks like. This is what it kind of looks like, You make a move this way, and then you kind of take a step that way. You might take a step back, and then, maybe they'll take 2 steps forward. It's interesting. I give the front office, this takes a lot of guts. To do that, because again, this is not a path a lot of teams take. They either take the obvious, let's try to go for it, or let's try to rebuild. And this is, I think, almost easier to nitpick. I think this is easier to nitpick than those two because they're so obvious. This one, it's abstract, is a word I've used as well. So I give them credit for that. Whether or not it's going to look good in the end, whether or not it's going to work out, we shall see. But I think this is exciting and interesting, and I'm willing to see it through and see what happens. Thanks for checking this out. We'll talk again soon.